So welcome to another episode of the podcast. And today my guest is Heather Roff, and she's from where I'm talking to her. She's from Sydney, Australia. So we're dealing with a 13-hour time difference here, but
yeah.
I appreciate you taking the time to do this, Heather. And so Heather works at Hillsong. And so why don't we start by just you can give us a kind of a brief rundown of what you do at Hillsong, what your role is there.
Sure. So I've been at Hillsong for 13 years. I came in 2008 and I've been on staff for 11 years. And I have done many jobs during that time. Started off with conferences and events. And the latest thing that I do is I'm a pastor and a theological trainer. That's my official title at Hillsong College, which is connected to the church. And so I do a lot of like what you do, Mike, but at a vocational level, not at a university level.
Okay, so how many students would you typically have at Hillsong College? Just to give us like a context there. Yeah.
So around 2000, but obviously with COVID, I'm sure you've experienced the same.
Yes, I'm running a little lower than normal for the student population here. So
so in 2020, around 2000.
Okay.
And then we definitely had the students that just jumped on planes and went home because their parents were like, come home. And then we do have
you would have a pretty international student body too, right? Like they would come from all over, not just Australia. So
yeah, it's pretty wild. I think the last time it was 66 nations that we checked. And so it's a lot, which is really cool. Also very unique to bring unity and have diversity at the same time within that enviament. So
yeah, probably some challenges there, I'm sure. Right?
Yeah, but it's actually a beautiful melting pot. So it's really fantastic.
Okay, well, why don't we kind of back up a little bit? You can give us a little bit of your kind of spiritual history, your bio, like where you grew up, and just all of that kind of stuff, and then we'll kind of move back into the present from there.
Yeah, sure. So I was originally born in Buffalo, New York. So from the stateside, now I'm an Australian citizen as well as a US citizen. And so the salvation story would be that I grew up in a non-Christian home, still praying for my parents' salvation, and radically got saved in 1994. I was at a roller skating rink, so youth group.
That's such a 90s story. It's great.
Yeah, so I do make a joke that I rolled my way to Jesus.
Right, the holy roller thing, right?
Well, yeah, I thought about that one. That's a good one. So there was a youth ministry. So my cousins went to a Wesleyan church, and there was a youth ministry in Buffalo that were very evangelistic. And that night I accepted Jesus. And my parents didn't know what to do with me because literally I radically was a different person within like 24 hours. I
think I know the ministry you're talking about. I think I spoke there one time because it was a really thriving youth ministry, and they had like the church gave them a whole separate building and stuff. I don't know what it was. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
cool.
I think, So I was one of those people. So no one knew I got saved that night. I remember like getting back in the youth van and feeling like something completely had changed. And I don't think anyone knew, and I didn't know the words to say anything. And they were really great. They had given us some discipleship material. And I was one of those people that just, went home to my house and went through it. And, it was kind of one of those, devotional booklets that help you walk through. So that was kind of my start, and then got connected into the youth group of where they had driven me to where I had gotten saved. And so fast forward, continue to grow in my walk with Christ. And then I went to summer camps and I met some people from Bethany Bible College. I was actually just thinking about it tonight, that Neil Horner was a big influence in my decision in coming to Bethany Bible College, now Kingswood. And he just was very encouraging and spoke into me life. And I felt really drawn to ministry, but wasn't sure whether that was really for me. And so when I was coming to figure out college, because I just felt like I wanted to take another discipleship step. So ended up at the doorsteps of Bethany Bible College, never been there. Just decided, yep, this is where I'm going. A few people came to visit me in New York. And so I had kind of met them, and that was just enough for me. So I showed up there in 1999 and yeah, did 4 years of, I was trying to think what I did, but I have like a Christian education music ministry. I was trying to think what my actual degree was called.
Well, that's so funny because when people are, I'm actually filming for, like at Kingswood, which was used to be Bethany. But I mean, when students are here, they agonize over which major they're going to take. And it's like they think it's a really big deal that's going to affect the rest of their, and then like 13 years later, you're like, what was my major again? You know, because it's all just kind of ministry, right?
Yeah. So music has always been a big part of my life. Something that I've done, at Hillsong, as well as within the Wesleyan Church and the different churches that I was a part of. But yeah, just, I don't know, have felt like lately it's more communication and speaking, but I digress. So college was really impacting for me. And yeah, just really
and
learned a lot.
Sussex would be, the East Coast of Canada would be a little different culturally than
It
Buffalo,
was
New York,
shock.
right?
Yeah. But college was really busy. And so that kept me moving forward. And I didn't notice it when I was there. But there were definitely some big cultural changes, and and I enjoyed my time in the Maritimes.
So you go from Buffalo to small town, kind of Bible college, Canada, and then and so how in the world did you end up like across the world in Australia?
Yeah, so after I had graduated, there was obviously several years there that was working in churches in the States. And I was in Canada for a little bit longer than when I studied. And so I decided to go to Hillsong College in 2008 to study some more unique pathways that I didn't have as much. And so I studied songwriting and dived in more into worship leading and that type of thing at Hillsong College. So sold my house, sold my car, gone on a plane, moved overseas, and lived in a house full of people. And Sydney's a very expensive city. And I was a student again at 26 or 27. And so that was really, really cool, and went into culture shock when I got here. That's kind of normal, I think, when you travel. It's always great to visit somewhere, and then when you live there, it's a little bit different.
It's a whole different thing, right?
Yeah.
So what were some of the differences that some of the culture shock, kind of going from the States to Australia?
Yeah, so definitely it's a secular nation. Like there's no state religion, or there's no religion for the country. It considers itself a secular nation. So that in itself, I think, was pretty different. I think I was living in the south of the United States before I moved there. So everyone was saved in the south.
Or they at least prayed the sinner's prayer once, right?
Yeah. And so I just think it was a bit of a unique experience to come out of that environment directly into a mega church environment, and just trying to find finding your feet where you are in a new environment, plus the schooling and that type of thing. So yeah, it was quite an adventure, and that's what I liked. It was an adventure. So. Yeah,
and people might not, then when you say it's expensive, they might not, kind of fully realize that even married couples and families sometimes live together just to be able to afford a place to live. So it's not unusual to be living in a house with a bunch of people in Australia, right?
Yeah, so I think that's part of Australia that is unique, is that there's so much wealth here. We live in the city of Sydney, so we literally walk to the Opera House tonight. It's just in our neighborhood, and there's just so much wealth that's here. And so with that, there's often sometimes not a need for people to know Christ. And so it's a unique ground when they have everything they need. And obviously there's people in our city who don't. But there are many, the vast majority of the population could be looked after by the government if they don't have a job, as well as it's just a wealthy country.
Yeah. So I think Canada and the US are, are definitely heading in that secular direction as well. Obviously the South of America is still the Bible Belt, but I think if you came back to Canada and spent any time living here, it would be probably a lot closer to Australia. Australia is just a little farther down that postmodern secular road, I think. So
Yeah, it's true.
so it's not, it's just the way it is. So how did that change how you perceive ministry and presenting Jesus to people?
Yeah, well, I think when I came to Australia, like Hillsong was constantly evangelizing within their services. So like one of the first things that I noticed that was a little bit different from my previous churches that I was a part of was every service, we took in a moment and we gave a plea or whatever the word is. We gave a moment for people we explained the gospel, and we gave a moment in the service for people to accept Christ. So that is one of the main things that we do within the Hillsong world, is that we believe in bringing people to services, getting them in an atmosphere where God can speak to them and move in their lives. And so what that looked like is that oftentimes people would literally walk down to the front and receive Christ. But sometimes it's hard to get people in the doors. If you got a friend, that's really good. But sometimes there's not a need for God, or specifically in Sydney, there can be spirituality that's appreciated. But when you say the words Jesus, or you clarify what that looks like a little bit more, that can be a little bit different. In Bondi, it's big for crystals and spirituality and yoga and a bit hippie-ish. And yeah, so that's the type of environments that are in our city. And then just statues, icons. It's quite common to walk by houses and see little Buddhas and little figurines of sorts. And because Sydney is such an international transient city, there's just lots of nationalities, and that comes with a lot of opinions on religion.
Yeah, it's interesting too. Even when a country supposedly goes secular, I think the impulse to worship is kind of built into people, and so it's not very long before other things kind of pop up. I don't think it's secularism sometimes turns pagan pretty quickly because there's just a need. There's a need for a God and a need to worship. So it's interesting that you mentioned some of that stuff, and some of the kind of generalized spirituality that is very popular. This is growing more and more popular, I think, in the U.S. and in Canada as well. So one of the things that I've appreciated about Hillsong is that very thing that you mentioned, that like when I've been in Hillsong, New York, or whenever I've been exposed to Hillsong, there is always that moment where no matter what the service has been about, there is an opportunity for people to accept Jesus, and that's kind of missing that right now in some of the other churches that I've been to. There's kind of an assumption that somewhere along the line you'll just become a Christian, it'll just kind of seep in, and there is something really good about just kind of clarifying this is what it means to be a Christian, and God works in our life through a process, but that process often includes a moment when you just decide this is what I'm going to do. So here Hillsong is like in the Christian world. Whenever you think of Australia, you automatically think of Hillsong, and so we might think of Australia as far more Christian than it is, because we automatically assume everybody's singing Hillsong worship and
Yeah, I think it is the largest church in Australia for sure. But yeah, I think that's important that we remember. Many don't know that. I think I was talking to someone on a plane one time, as throughout my years of traveling, there's been a lot of planes. And I said to them, oh, they lived 30 minutes down the road from the church you were at, Mike, the Hills campus, and they had never heard of it. And
right,
so I was just
which
like,
here would, kind of blow people's minds. Like, what do you mean?
yeah, and we have signs on the highway because we rent out our venue for other events and stuff like that because it's a convention center. So like, you would think they would have saw the sign and Norwest Boulevard is quite a prominent street in that area. So it is funny, but I think there's, still a lot more work to do. Many do need to come to know Christ and we need to give them opportunities. So.
Yeah, you mentioned a couple of years ago, Colleen and I we dropped into Australia on our way by, and
It's hard to believe that's a
went
couple years
to
ago.
it was whatever that summer was pre-COVID, whatever. It
Yeah.
seems like a long time ago now, but
Yeah.
we dropped in, and Heather and her then fiance, but now husband, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
you've been married.
Matt.
Yeah. Kind of met us at the church, and one of the things that struck me about that visit, I was kind of like, oh, Hillsong is a church. It's like a church with a wide spectrum of ages and
Yeah.
different kinds of people. Hillsong is a local church,
Very
because
much so.
my impression before of Hillsong was Hillsong, New York, which is kind of hipster central. And so
Never been,
yeah.
actually.
So I mean, the first time I walked into Hillsong, New York, I was like, oh, this is where all the 20 to 30-year-olds that aren't coming to our churches are. They're all here. But it was kind of refreshing for me to realize, oh, Hillsong is actually just, it started out as a local church, and even though we know it from music and stuff, it is a local church. So so talk a little bit about kind of what it's like to be a pastor at Hillsong. What is it, if there is a typical day, what does that look like for somebody that's working at Hillsong?
Yeah, so it's taken me a long time to get to this point, to be a pastor at Hillsong. One of the things that we do is we just kind of like, we never say, hey, do you want to be a pastor? It's kind of like you're just in the fold. There's no resume that you apply for. There's, none of that. It's just being around for years and being in our environment and being in our church, and definitely going to our Bible college really helps to set up the church culture. So let's say on a Tuesday, one of the things that I teach classes, so it's very practical things for me is I would teach classes. We have a place called the Epicenter. And yeah, it's kind of it's a building that's just built just for college, to be honest. And so we would have classes, we would go teach, and those could be like, practical things like Old Testament or whatever. So have that. Then we have staff meetings every week. So staff meetings are very poignant times where we would meet up with Brian. We don't call our pastors Pastor Brian, we would call them by their name. So we're not being disrespectful. That's just the culture here. And so we would we generally have leadership time together and time as an entire staff to connect. So that could look like 700 people in various locations within just Australia that would gather around. We've lessened a little bit with COVID, but yeah, so we would have that, and that would be great. We'd have worship at church, like just as part of our job, something specific to that. Then have classes, meet up with students, pastoral care chats and conversations. And so one of the things we do is we're very pastoral in their lives because they are far away and they're overseas and they struggle with being homesick and not having enough money because it's an expensive city. And struggling with the tensions of school. So all of those things are aspects of what we do. And then we're very much involved in church as well. So if that's like a mega prayer night, running a connect group or a D group or whatever, being on Sundays, being in services, helping to lead pre-service gatherings, that type of thing, that we would be very involved and just helping to lead the atmosphere and helping to meet new people. And so it's a wide span of kind of what I do, which is really wonderful. It's very diverse and never boring.
Yeah. And how many services would you have like on a weekend? What would a typical weekend look like?
It depends on the location. So some of our locations that we are fortunate to own or have long leases, we can fill a lot more people. So at my local service, which would be Hillsong Alexandria in the city, we would have we'd have 3 services, and we can fit about 1,000 people inside at a time. And then at the Hills campus, they'd have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They'd have 5 services. Where they can fit around 4,000 at a time. Those are the capacities. Those are not necessarily what they fill, but just to kind of give you an understanding of what would happen. So Easter weekend, when we had Reinhard Bonnke, we had about 60,000 people attend church on Easter weekend in multiple locations. So just depends on the environment and what's happening. And we're in a rebuild process. So we've definitely lost lots of people. We're a transient city in Sydney. People worked in television and they weren't making shows anymore. And so they had to go back to the UK, and stuff like that has happened a lot.
So what is the COVID situation in Australia right now? Like, are you guys I don't know which wave we're on here, but we're on I don't know, like a 3rd or 4th wave, and things are getting more restricted, locking down again. Are you guys still in that territory, or have you kind of moved beyond that?
Well, we've been in lockdown, and when I say lockdown, I'm talking pretty strict lockdown,
real lockdown,
compared to most people's standards, like police enforcing, that type of thing. Thankfully, where I live, we haven't been what we would call hotspots. So they haven't been enforcing as much in our area. They go to where the needs are. But yeah, people had to have permits to drive in their car. And they had to have reasons why they were going places. If people had to go to work, they needed to have a COVID test every 3 days. So it was very serious. Delta, I don't know the details, but I've been in lockdown 93 days as of today. And we finally have kind of a way out because of our vaccination rate. So 11th of October, they're going to start releasing some things for only vaccinated people. So it's been interesting.
Oh, for sure. It's definitely, it's definitely clarified here. It's clarified like who is serious about Jesus and who isn't, and it's clarified. It's a lot of pastors I talk to have gone through those moments, like, I want to quit, and and so everybody's figuring out what does church look like coming out of the other end of this. What rules have you had? Has there been different rules for churches? Like, how have you done church during COVID?
So a couple things, like our church was pretty committed to not. Okay, so if anything's a hotspot, it shows up in the news.
Right.
So like it says, oh, so and so.
So you don't want to be a hotspot.
So we didn't want to be a hotspot. So we also have we kind of have a governance in our church because we are quite large. It's called Safe Church. They're a group of people that make decisions for us. Their job is procedures and protocol, and to make sure that everything is looking good. So for the longest time, because the 4 square meter rule was very difficult for us to do within our church environment, because we used to just pack people in. It's what I call a COVID nightmare now. And so that's just been interesting. So we didn't go back for a while. like we actually lived in quite great freedoms in New South Wales, our state, for a long time last year. Like people's disastrous 2020s were actually not ours. We were very safe because they closed down the borders and they couldn't bring people in, and then they had solid procedures. So anyway, so we didn't go back until really late, and then when we went back, we couldn't sing. So we're all wearing masks, and like worship leaders are up on the platform.
That wouldn't matter as much in some church movements, but in
Yeah.
Hillsong, that would be a serious thing.
Yeah. So it was really just awkward. So like the rules were, I think, that you could have 5 singers up on the platform. And keep in mind, like, it just looks funny. Like our stages are quite large at some locations, and it just looks funny that you can only have that many people on the platform. You know, you used to having a choir and those types of things. So yeah, it's been really interesting. And so, you know, when we have come back, we noticed a lot of people weren't comfortable coming back, or they got used to, you know, having a lazy Sunday.
Church on the couch. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's just been interesting. And because we've always done online for the longest time, because we have a television channel at Hillsong called Hillsong Channel, it's just been one of those things where people knew that it would be there. So yeah, I still don't think we're there yet. And I still don't think because of this lockdown has been the hardest on us. I think we're in for a wild surprise.
Right.
Yeah.
I think I'm going to call this winter the winter of our discontent, because I feel like at least here, you know, last year everybody, you know, kind of went into the winter and they didn't really know what to expect, so they kind of rode it out. But when you go into more of a lockdown phase and you know what it looks like, it's a little more discouraging for people. So I've got a feeling I'm going to have a lot of mental illness kind of stress and anxiety conversations this winter.
And there's a lot of that. And that's one of the things, we run connect groups, and we just really believe in old-fashioned discipleship. Matt, my husband, has been a connect group leader for a long time. I've been running connects. And it's the way that we can look after people in COVID, because most of the people in our connect group are very new Christians. We're like constantly taking in fringe people, which I love. But they don't have any family in the country. Usually they're migrants. They've come here for work. They don't have anybody around. So it's been a real saving grace that we can kind of reframe, come around the word, and just be part of that, because that's helped with mental health, and just doing stuff that's practical, how they can apply it to their life with where they're at. Yeah.
And I was reading that, I can't remember who said it, but it was something I just read recently that said that, you know, anxiety is created in us when we have an increased personal vulnerability, coupled with a loss of control about our outward circumstances. And when I read that, I realized, like, oh, that means that basically everybody in COVID has this ongoing, it's kind of low level, but that they have this ongoing anxiety that they're dealing with, that they can't quite put their finger on. But that's why everybody's a little crankier, and their fuse is a little shorter than normal, and you know, they find themselves saying things that, and they're kind of like, oh, where did that come from? And so kind of helping, realizing that, I guess, myself, and then trying to help people through that is going to be pretty crucial, maybe in the next couple months.
Yeah, there's clearly something going on. I don't, it's like a rebuilding, like, I don't know, there's just a shaking. I just sense that there's a shaking in the church, that the things that we got distracted with, the things that we thought we needed, they're just gonna fall to the side, and we're gonna rebuild the core, I think. And I think that if I can prophesy, be my
yes
self. Yeah, I do. I sense that the things that we've got distracted with, the way that we've done church, I think there'll be a shifting and a change out of that. And it'll start with discipleship. It'll start with those one-on-one conversations. helping people to grow in their faith.
Yeah, we just like on Thursday night here, we're recording on a Monday. It's a Monday morning where I'm at. It's Monday night where Heather is, but
That's right.
all the faith leaders here got an email outlining new things for churches, and so at this past weekend, every church kind of had to adjust and figure out how they were, going to do things. But it occurred to me, as people were fighting about, having big gatherings, and we had a rule about singing and not singing, and vaccinated and unvaccinated, all those things. And it occurred to me that, maybe small groups and house church is the way to go here. Like, nobody can really control what happens in my basement. So, and usually if you get a group of 10 people and somebody plays guitar, and, and so church we may come out of this looking very different, kind of the way that we do things. And I think maybe people who are waiting for it just to kind of go right back to the original default mode may be waiting for a long time.
Yeah, I do think though we really care about that in my world. And so, I mean, I hope that it does, because, the atmosphere and the impacting services, they do make a difference.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I do think though that it will be more than just that. It's wonderful here in Australia because we have beautiful weather. So like when we
you can meet outside, right?
We can meet outside, and we have a rooftop. So we live in a 1-bedroom in the city near the wharf, Starling Harbor, if you know the area. And so we, for a while, like when we were trying to meet up again, just to keep everybody safe, we're like, okay, we're going to go to the rooftop. We've got these big tables up there.
Right.
And now like everyone can do picnics right now. It's like you can do a picnic with 5 people. And it's like, you're right. So some of these things, like, I think we have to be creative and just see what we can do. And because our season's into spring now, as we roll into summer, just making wiser decisions in the way that we connect with people and just being intentional. Sometimes we walk. So I like meet a friend. We have 5K radius. I'm not sure if you guys have that in Canada. We're not allowed to go farther than 5K.
Oh, no,
So
no, we don't have that.
Yeah. So you just find out where your friend's 5K radius meets, like the circles meet up. And
so what happens if you go outside of that radius? Could you actually like get a ticket from a policeman or something? Wow.
Yeah. But it has helped though, to be frank, because the movement of COVID was just taking it. So it's like, someone from Sussex has COVID, everyone in Sussex has COVID. Then now they take it to St. John, and then they take it to, like it just would travel a lot faster that way. So to kind of, but obviously food and different things still need to get around. So.
Right.
Yeah. So,
well, yeah, and one of the things here is like I think one of the kind of flashpoints here as far as is that a lot of the government and and anybody who is kind of secular does not consider church an essential service, in the same way that, so ironically, like the liquor store and the marijuana shop are essential services, but church isn't. And so we have a difference of opinion about those things. But and I totally agree on the, like there is something about a meeting where a bunch of Christians are together and you're in
powerful,
like a spiritually charged atmosphere.
Yeah.
I don't think we've fully, kind of explored, even biblically, like there's something that happens in the Bible when Jesus and the disciples gather large crowds. There's something that happens there that's different, that happens in smaller groups. And so we don't ever want to totally forego that, for sure. But
the gathering and the scattering.
Yeah.
It's good.
Yeah. Just the balance between those, it's got to be, so often we just swing to extremes and everybody has their silver bullet, like everybody small groups, like and so it's like, usually it's everything. It's like a good balance of everything is the best, but
yeah, it's so true.
So if you had to kind of just say one thing to encourage Christian leaders or Christian workers right now, just
Yeah.
kind of something maybe the Lord's been saying to you, if you had something that you could say to them, what would it be?
Yeah. I was thinking of that scripture. I think it's Psalm 92. It's let me just pull it up. Basically, it talks about the importance of the house of God. And I've really enjoyed the scripture. Sorry. You can tell I'm really planned up.
Hey, no worries.
I really like the scripture. It says, Psalm 92, verse 11, the righteous will flourish like a palm tree. They will grow like a cedar of Lebanon, planted in the house of the Lord. They will flourish in the courts of our God. They will still bear fruit in old age. They will stay fresh and green, proclaiming the Lord is upright. He is my rock. There is no wickedness in him. And I would just say, I've had some fun years this past couple of years. It's been intense, but I just wanted to encourage that we will flourish when we're in the house of the Lord and building his house. And I also want to say, it's important. I think something that COVID has spoken to us about this season is it's important to have some balance, some space, some margin, but as well as actually go and do the work of the ministry. And that looks different. We always say that the methods may change, but the message doesn't. And I think that's whether it's cheesy or not, it really is true. And so, yeah, I think always finding out the why, going to God, I'm a big believer in praying and going to God and asking him to help you through this season. Psalm 121 has been helpful for me as well. Where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. He will not let me slumber. He will not let me sleep. And just going back to the word, being filled in his word, not letting the disciplines not allowing the disciplines to be drudgery or something that we have to do all of the time, but allowing the word, allowing prayer, allowing ourselves to be in a position of refreshing. And something that we say often in our world is that you've got to stir it up. You've got to speak the word. You've got to, word and faith, believing that the word of God is real. And there's going to be seasons where we don't feel like everything's great. I'm 40 years old. I've been in ministry or working towards ministry since I've been 18. And there are seasons where there are mountaintops and I've been to the deepest of valleys, but God is still with us. And I just think it's important for us to find friends to come alongside, people that you can appropriately debrief things that don't turn to gossip, but appropriately debrief and digest. I think there's wisdom in that. That you can help to continue to move forward into the ministry. And what was the word that God gave you? Sometimes my students come to me and they're like, oh, I think I need to leave. And I'm like, okay, cool. If you want to go, that's fine. But why did you come here in the beginning? And I would say to people, why were you in ministry? Because for me, I was called to ministry in the Sussex Wesleyan gym a long time ago. And I felt like I wrestled with God and I was like, okay, cool. If you're going to call me to ministry, awesome. But if you're not, let me know that too. And so just remembering why we do what we do. And I would also say, I'm just taking the gap here.
Go for it.
Don't make it about yourself. It really isn't it really isn't about us. We really are just messengers, and we are the people that God has. We're not awesome because we're called. We're just broken people that he's called and he wants us to help others with. So I think, just keeping things simple. I'm married to Matt and he's incredible. And he's just has a wonderful, explosive faith, but also he's a simple guy from New Zealand who just keeps things easy and doesn't overcomplicate them. And I like to think that I'm a thinker and I want to process and stuff like that. But sometimes just sitting in his word, worshiping, doing the things we know to do. Fruit will come. Fruit will come. Sometimes we just have to be faithful and sometimes we can't see it. And I had a basil plant that was out on my balcony and it completely had died. Everything was just dead in it. And then one day we didn't water it, we didn't do anything. And one day it just came back to life. And I was thinking about it, like, that's ministry sometimes.
Right.
Things look dead. They do. They don't look like they were before. We get things complicated because we think success is, big concerts, big conferences, and I've been fortunate to be a part of those things, but that's not what it's about at all.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And one of the things the Lord's been kind of reminding me of is that your season determines your strategy. Like
Yeah.
and so you've got to look at it's not thinking about what did I do in the past, or having like a false ideal of what success looks like. Really, you just really have to look at the season you're in and determine like how the Lord wants you to move forward, like in that season. And every season has its time, and there'll be other seasons too. And so that's, yeah. And as simple as it sounds, if I was going to summarize what you said, it's just kind of like sometimes we just need to turn off the world and turn on the word, right? And get our values and our worldview have to come. It has to come from the good news, not just from not from the news that we're seeing online, or because that's usually always slanted towards the negative and slanted towards doubt instead of faith. So just kind of keeping ourselves built up in the word is, as cliche as that sounds in the Christian world, it's absolutely true.
Yeah,
Well,
it's vital.
yeah, and I think that's kind of a great place to end. So thanks for taking the time out of your busy day to do this, and I will pause our recording here and kind of edit it later.